I'm Gary Venner, Managing Director of IFA Acquisitions, and I'm joined by Marais, Director of Vertus Capital, where we continue our informative question and answer series on our YouTube channel to provide insights into helping buyers and sellers understand the benefits of using brokers for the sale of their IFA businesses. The title of the next video is coming up on screen now.
So Gary, one of the questions we get fairly frequently is, why do I even need a broker? Why can't I just sell my business directly?
Well, Matt, an IFA can sell their business directly, so there's nothing stopping businesses doing that, and quite often they do. However, by choosing to work with well-connected brokers who have the experience, and the firms they work for also have the experience in the IFA sector, is likely to be able to introduce them to multiple acquirers. And of course, by doing that, is going to increase the amount of choice, basically, that a vendor has available. You would expect a broker to be very up to date on what the competitive valuations are for businesses. So it's again helping to make sure that it's very commercial, that transaction. And also the terms of the deal, and of course, it's really important to build into that experience and help that the broker will be able to have, not just at the very beginning of the process, but throughout that process until completion.
One of the things we see, which is why we like brokers or representation in a deal, is the fact that firms that don't have clear representation don't actually know what the journey involves. When they have someone that's helping actually broker and facilitate that process, makes the deal a lot easier to do, because they know this is a reasonable next step, this is where the deal flows, this is how long it takes, what I need to do to prepare, and all of those facets typically mean a better deal gets done that's more structured to both parties and with more certainty, so there isn't a risk of getting 6 months down the process on a deal and then not actually finalising a deal.
Absolutely, Matt, and I couldn't agree with you more on that. And that's something that we really, bring to the party, I think, is that experience of knowing what to do next, and also that there will be what I call little stumbling blocks on the way. What you want to make sure is that they don't become roadblocks, and brokers will have a good understanding of why something needs to be in place there as well. So I think we're a great sounding board for both acquirers and sellers in that process as well.
So Gary, with sellers looking at initiating a process around selling their business, it's often a very tricky time for them because they feel vulnerable to their information becoming public and what that might do to their clients, questions that might come, or competitors who might decide that it's an opportunity to attack their business.
Yeah.
If I'm going into a sale process, what can I do to get comfortable about the confidentiality element of the deal? In other words, how can we make sure it doesn't become public?
Yeah, and I totally agree, Matt, and it's something that we really excel in, which is the confidentiality aspect of this. So first of all, I'd be saying to those sellers, don't use business transfer agencies that would typically promote the business and almost becomes easily identifiable into the public domain. That's a really area that you wouldn't want to do. I would also say be careful if you're using networks or service providers that are offering that sort of service to introduce to their appointed representatives. Just make sure that you're asking what confidentiality that they have in place over that, because the concern is that some of those appointed representatives may feel differently about that information, and you wouldn't want them to be sharing it to the public. So brokers like ourselves, we make sure that there are non-disclosure agreements in place with the acquirers to protect that confidentiality, and therefore if they're using lawyers and professionals, then they need to make sure that those individuals are also aware of that confidentiality and must also extend into that as well. And I think that's where, you know, the seller does need that, you know, that confidence that nothing will leak. You know, and there are ways that we can improve that by using personal emails and only phoning on mobile lines, etc. So we're very aware of the need to keep that confidentiality intact.
Great. So Gary, in doing a sale, what flexibility do I have to control the way and timeline of my exit?
Okay, so in that situation, we would be making sure that the vendor and the acquirer are happy with how the process should work post-sale, basically. And you know, it will depend very much on whether the advisor wants to stay involved in advising for a period of time, or whether they're happy to have a more ambassadorial type of role. And the latter, we tend to find, is probably the way 80% of those deals would go. So it's making sure that they're around to do good handovers and be on hand to answer queries, questions that their existing clients may have during that process. And very often in the agreement, you can expect to see some level of cooperation over a period of time. And some make it much more formal and would put in a contract and maybe even a remuneration scale for that, if that is going to have a lot more involvement. But definitely I think it's making sure that the vendor feels comfortable that the both, not just clients but staff as well, are embedded into the acquisition process, because at the end of the day we really want to maximise the retention of clients. And it's in the seller's best interest to do that as well, because if any clients leave, they're possibly going to come off the other end in terms of adjustments as well. So it works for all parties, and just working out what is the best for both sides.
So lots of the sellers we speak to would have a timeline in mind. And if I had a 3-year timeline from today to being fully out of the business, when should I start speaking with a broker?
Well, Matt, we often are speaking with vendors 2 to 3 years in advance of their exit date as well. And I think that's a really good time to start that dialogue with a broker. It may be that the broker can start to talk about different aspects of how that sale could take place. So that may be that if somebody really doesn't like the amount of work involved in actually running the business, that could be relieved from them now, but still allow that individual to stay on for longer. But equally, it's at very least a good health check by talking to the broker, because they will talk about how the business currently is structured and whether there are areas that may improve its ability for sale in 2 to 3 years' time as well. You know, looking at whether there's any areas needed for de-risking or for the liability side of things in terms of ongoing past advice. So yeah, these are things that sometimes you do need to have at least 2 years in advance, certainly to meet HMRC rules on business asset disposal relief, etc. So I would definitely say start talking to a broker, and the whole thing is likely to improve the consideration and more attractiveness for the future.
So Gary, for most sellers, there is an element of deferment in a deal. So if I'm a seller and I'm going to get paid over time, how do I know I'm going to get my deferred payments?
Okay, Matt. So firstly, what I would say as a broker is one of the first questions we're going to be asking an acquirer is their funding ability for acquisitions. So we will have carried out a certain amount of due diligence initially in any event. However, it's very much for the vendor to be able to ask these questions. For instance, the acquirer is going to be doing due diligence on the vendor's business, both in terms of its clients, its risk, and also its financial records. And so therefore the vendor can ask the same questions really about the financial ability. We would expect there to be a balance sheet. It may not always show the full amount of net worth that equals the acquisition value, but it is there to show the stability of that business. And of course we should be asking, is that business looking to arrange equity or debt funding, and having details of that as well, because that's another aspect of this. So really just asking that sort of that due diligence around the financial ability is absolutely necessary. Of course, with some acquirers that have actually had previous acquisition deals, you've got that extra opportunity to be able to go out and ask the other vendors their experience in this as well. Obviously, we would expect the acquirer to be more than happy at a certain point in that process when that would be certainly something they would be more than happy to oblige with. Of course, the other area is a solicitor, making sure that the actual purchase agreement, sales and purchase agreement, has got those clauses in there that what happens in the event of a default. I think what we all should also remember here, Matt, is we're working in a very fortunate industry that is regulated by the FCA. And so a little bit of protection here for the vendor is the fact that if an acquirer defaults on a financial arrangement, this causes an issue under the fit and properness of that business. So there is that little bit of extra protection. And of course, deals in the IFA sector, we are used to that, there is an upfront payment followed by deferred payments. Generally speaking, could be 50% upfront, followed by 25% in 12 months, 25% in 2 years, or something similar. So, there is going to be an expectation that some of the payments will be deferred.
Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and switch on notifications so that you won't miss our next video in this series.